Okay, well, I'll backtrack a little bit then. So just to repeat what I just said for the recording, you know, at some, I can even reference my spreadsheet here. So during the 1921 biennium, the funding to family networks was cut, and so all the existing contracts with the family networks that we had at the time were discontinued. And so when the funding was reinstated, the state had to go out with the new competitive, transparent procurement process. The intent was obviously to cover as many counties as possible and extend the support to as many families as possible. So we were procuring for 7 to 10 networks. At the time, only 6 applied and were awarded contracts. The contracts were awarded based on the full amounts proposed at the time, so there was money left over, which was intended to then, because it wasn't awarded at the time, was intended to go back out for e-procurement of additional capacity across the state. At the time, right now, actually last biennium now, we had 6 contracts. And I also wanted to clarify a little bit of the relationship of how this contracting process works. So ODDS ultimately receives the family network funding. ODDS contracts with the Oregon Council on Developmental Disabilities to administer and provide support and technical assistance to the contracts directly with family networks. And when I talk about Oregon Council on Developmental Disability, I talk about the agency portion of the Oregon Council on Developmental Disability, meaning Leslie and staff that she hires. And the contract is administered through intergovernmental agreement, because we are kind of two sides. We both are programs within Oregon Department of Human Services. So it's basically an agreement between 2 state programs, or within an agency. And the Oregon Council on Developmental Disability ultimately drives the kind of the procurement process and holds the contracts, individual contracts with each family network. Now, the way the IGA is structured, it is a partnership between ODDS and the council as the agency portion of the council. So ODDS does have a lot of say and input into, and provides a lot of support into the procurement process and ultimately the contracts management administration process as well. And Christy, I see you have a hand up.
I do. I wanted to backtrack to something that you said about the procurement process and about the funding. I think that is the point that we are addressing, is that not all of the submissions were submitted the same. 4 were submitted for 1 year per the instructions we received, 2 submitted for 2 years. The difference, so when the contracts were awarded, they were not awarded fully. I think that is a misnomer. They were awarded based on what the submissions were, but to state that they were awarded at the full amount, it was the full amount of 1 year for 4 networks, the full amount of 2 years for 2 networks. They were not equitably funded based on the instructions that were received. And I think that is a fundamental piece that we need to draw back when we talk about how that process was completed and how they were distributed, because that is the issue that we are being told now, is that it was the biennium, it was the solicitation, despite the fact that we followed the direction that ODDS staff included in Oregon buys. And so that is, I think, a fundamental piece. I saw some head shaking, and I believe that is partly where the issue is. We have a very good understanding of the process. We understand the relationship with ODDS and OCDD. We know that Senate Bill 1016 happened after the procurement process. But when we go back to that, to reestablish the family networks, that is the piece that we're having concern and disagreement about.
So the timing, of course, of the award of the money was a little awkward, because we've gotten the money for the full biennium, and it took about a year for us to issue the, for the RFP to be issued. The funding, and I'll let others speak in more detail because I'm not as deep in the kind of contractual conversations, but we received the funding for the full biennium, but because it took a little time for us to get the RFP out, review the proposals, and ultimately get the contracts in place. The full biennium funding that was available to us was awarded at the time. And people, obviously sounds like there was some confusion that was created throughout the process because it looks like some of the networks were aware that that's what's going on. There was a full biennium funding squeezed into trying to be spent during the 1 year of the biennium, and some networks potentially either missed it or, something maybe somewhere was confusing in the process. We were not.
So you're talking about last procurement process, not the current one. Okay, I had to clarify.
Yeah, so because of how the timing worked out there when the funding was reinstated. And I don't know if Leslie or Heather, you want to jump in and speak to the other
and
side.
Anna, I would like to just state there was not confusion. It is in Oregon Buys, the direction from Jason Fong on what to submit as far as the budget. And if one of the others who might have it readily available, it stated to complete a 1-year budget and submit it for the remainder of the biennium, which was, half the year. So we were submitting for 1 year of work. So again, I would go to when we talk about the transparency, the contracts were not administered then based on the same information.
Gotcha.
And Christy, can I just clarify, was that for 21-23 or for the 23-25?
That was for the 21-23, the first May of 22's request for proposal to reinstate networks.
So the instructions in Oregon Buys for that particular RFP said give a 1-year budget.
Correct.
Okay.
So how many networks actually submitted a 1-year budget, and how many networks actually submitted 2-year budgets?
Well, CODSN and the ARC Lane submitted 2-year budgets. 4 networks, Facto Oregon, Bridging Opportunities, Creating Opportunities, and Coast submitted 1-year budgets because we were looking at the Q&A because of ambiguity. That's where we look to receive direction.
Gotcha.
Well, I just wanted to respond that I read it differently, that we actually do 3 networks and I knew what was allocated. We did the work, we did double work. We worked really hard that year. So from my perspective, I submitted 1-year budget, but we had been allocated the amount. So I went for what it would have been, but we spent it and we worked and we had a lot of catch up work. So I know we read it differently, but that was where I was at when I submitted the budget.
Gotcha.
And I just want to say also that we attempt several of the networks, I know myself included, attempted to clarify the 2023-25 funding amounts, that they would in fact be doubled because we had submitted a 1-year for Creating Opportunities. We had submitted a 1-year plus a re-engagement funding. So to clarify, we had provided a base annual budget amount for 1 year according to Oregon Buys Q&A document that was published, and according to that direction. And then I had attempted to, or had emailed the contract administrator early in June, June 7th to be exact, and said, I want to make sure that we're on the same page, that clarifying moving forward, that this is our base annual amount, that it will be doubled for the biennium and the new contract moving forward. And that went unanswered. There was no response to that email, and no conversation occurred on behalf of the contract administrator to clarify what our funding amounts would be moving forward. I know I'm not the only family network that reached out to clarify funding and had no response. So all of this could have been avoided months ago.
Yeah,
And
And
Anna, I'm
yeah.
gonna ask if one of my colleagues, I don't have the PDF of the question and answers at the tip of my fingers. I've been looking, I can't figure out which folder I put it in. So if somebody could maybe upload it so that ODVS has that information that we are
Sure.
referring to. Thanks.
It's on the emails as well, but yeah, sure, I will do that.
And we have a lot of your information already and compiled and looked across. I think there is a couple of things we need to consider there, and we may not be able to come to any kind of final resolution today. We may need to take some information back and have a little bit more deliberation over our available options. But basically, where we kind of sort of today is that the contracts that we've got is the contracts that we've got. We may, and like I said, what I'm committing to do today is that we're going to take this conversation back and see what additional options we might have. The process that we need to understand is that, yes, there are proposals, but once the proposals are submitted, typically there is also a next stage in the process where contracts get negotiated. The state does not always award the contracts just purely based on the proposals in the contracting process. It is very customary for us to negotiate with the proposers to make sure we arrive at reasonable costs. We do market research. We compare to other similar contracts or scopes of work to arrive at a good, solid proposal that's based in, not just in what the vendor is requesting, but also with what the market is telling us and similar contracts are telling us. I think it's clear that in this process, maybe, not the entirely most thoughtful process have occurred in terms of negotiating the actual contracts and providing the most clear information. And so that needs to be acknowledged. And, we'll figure out kind of how to hopefully we'll be able to figure out how to correct for that. We are unfortunately somewhat locked into the situation we've got today. And also, if we would have done a more kind of diligent review of that and understood very clearly where we had 2-year budgets and where we had 1-year budgets, the negotiation process might have looked very different, and the final amounts might have looked different one way or the other for a variety of networks. And that's something we're going to need to be probably cognizant going forward in any future kind of negotiations and deliberations around that. So I think that's just acknowledgement of fact.
We
Anna,
appreciate that.
Can I jump in? I also want to say that we received email from Leslie that stated there would be no renegotiation of contracts. I specifically asked about a renegotiation based on the reduction of half of the contract.
Yeah.
And was told it was scalable. I've asked for definitions. I also proposed a negotiation and it was not accepted. And so our concern continues to be that even in that, we tried to move, could we do work at half of the amount? And there's been no willingness to negotiate the scope of work.
Well, and that's why I'm saying we may be locked into some limitations here and what can be done immediately now. But like I said, we may want to be able to, take it back and see what other options, because we're going to have to kind of have maybe additional conversations with OCMP and DOJ. Because that was basically our understanding. It was their counsel and recommendations. That's kind of the situation we're sort of in right now.
So, Anna, I do have a question. So when you say locked in, are you saying you're locked in? I think it would help us understand why you feel that we're locked into a particular situation and why we can't just receive contract amendments and new contract amendment or extensions.
Well, and I understand you guys are looking at that there is an unallocated amount, but that unallocated amount was not awarded in the last biennium. And the intent for that amount is to go out for additional procurement, for additional capacity across the state. It is difficult.
However, Anna, Anna, I'm sorry if I could interrupt.
Mhm.
What's concerning again is that it's not an unallocated amount. It's a amount that wasn't fully negotiated, but we expected moving forward into so when we were told to do budgets for 1 year and we provided 1 year budgets, it would stand to reason that unless told otherwise, we would have 2 years worth of funding for 2 years of work. Nobody here in this room or in this virtual meeting room would accept to be paid half of their amount of funding or their salary for 2 years of work and only receive 1 year of their salary. It's not reasonable to expect that we are going to be doing 2 years of work for 1 year of pay. And that's the case primarily for Bridging Communities in Fact Oregon. They're being underfunded, and that underfunding amount that's happening is going to hurt families. It's going to hurt the networks. It doesn't do any good for the state. It's being withheld. For what reason? There's no good reason to withhold that funding when it's supposed to be legislatively approved budget allocated to the existing family networks. That's the information we gave to the legislature. That's what they provided the funding for. The fact that we're hearing that there's a withholding of funds or there's an unallocated amount doesn't make any sense, because we submitted moving forward for full funding, and we actually are going to need more additional funding in addition to the legislatively approved budget to fully fund the networks.
Well, Cheryl, just let me clarify something. The funding that's been awarded by the legislature was supposed to be openly and competitively procured to the networks. It was not intended for existing networks. And that's how procurement process with the state work. We get general fund. We have to follow very transparent, accountable process to make sure we solicit, qualified vendors to deliver the work.
And I understand that. However, Anna, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I don't appreciate being interrupted. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry. I do need to clarify, though, that the legislatively approved budget was after the procurement awards had occurred.
Well, let me continue on my thought that I was going to say is that the problem with if we were more thoughtfully looking across renegotiating all the contracts, most likely we would have to go through a new procurement process so that we can clearly outline the requirements, have appropriate, accurate bids submitted to us from which we would be able to renegotiate the contracts. And obviously, like I said, we'll need to go back and have another conversation with OCNP and DOJ to have what available options we have at the time. When I said that would have to be done across all the different networks, not just with the networks that are looking at today, because if we were to fully award, we would be over budget based on your proposals. Let me clarify that. But also, we would also be taking into considerations, what we have paid historically for a similar or exact scope of work to the networks. And ultimately, when we actually looking at some of the contracts that we have in place, for example, for creating opportunities, historically creating opportunities have received the same amount that you are awarded today. Well, today it's now 4.2% for the same scope of work you're performing today. So we would need to have some, in the negotiation process, we would be considering some of those circumstances when we would be looking at potentially increasing the contract amount. Is that, well, if historically organization was able to deliver the same scope of work or services for this amount, what would be the justification for significantly increasing it today? And kind of the same for fact, there is a request for substantially amount of money, yet we're seeing that the fact is serving one less county, so the scope of work is actually smaller. So all of those things would have to be considered in the true negotiation, in the good faith, founded in fact negotiations around these contracts. And potentially we would need to look at some of other contracts as well. For smaller counties, maybe take into consideration the amount of people being served in those particular counties, and just look at all the different facts and criteria to, across the board, reshuffle the funding. And so that would have to, but obviously that's something we would need to launch such a process. It would be extremely disruptive right now. Maybe it is necessary, but like I said, we're going to need to take this back to OCMP and DOJ and see what our options are.
I'd like to speak just to Bridging Communities, because we have signed the contract and yet also feel a little stuck in the process. And I think we were told that all of the funding was awarded. There was no more money available, and that in a call with Leslie about our budget, because of course we talked with her when our line item allocations changed last year because award timing was different, et cetera, that we would renew at the same amount, which was half of our funding per year, which is actually less than we received prior to the stop and renewal. So we're trying to operate with more staff as we have increased our scope of work. We've more than doubled what we're doing with Stacy and Rosa. Rosa was not a part of our contract prior to the stop and renewal. So, we are thankfully have the backing of Living Opportunities. It's actually where I officially work, right? Is that there's support for activities and the help to make some of this happen. But trying to do the work that we do with half of the amount really is going to result in half of the work. So it feels a little harsh to say we're going to expand, but ask you to do half of what you're doing. We're going to go to other counties because they're not getting reached yet, but you need to not do what all you're doing. Does that make sense? I think it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So we signed because we got what we expected, because we were told there was no other money and there would be no other options. So then to learn that others are in the same boat, but not everybody, because some people didn't quite read it the same way, as well as, oh, there is more money that we are going to go out for. It just doesn't feel right. So that's, for us, that's where being a part of this conversation is trying to just be transparent, right? We're all trying to help families. The amount that we are doing in work for the dollar amount and the number of families is substantial compared to, a group home person who has to receive 24-hour services. The dollar amount seems interesting.
Gotcha.
So I just want to respond. We did have conversations with each individual network about how we did not allocate all of the funds in the last biennium. I have notes. I did my one-on-ones with all of you at the beginning of our kickoffs. We had talked about other proposals that might be used in these circumstances. So I just want to be really clear on that last fall we did have these conversations, that the 21-23 money did not exhaust all, but it was awarded for the biennium. I just want to be clear on that.
Thank you, Leslie. Christy?
I'm going to restate a few things that have already been said. In regards to our contract, I think it's disingenuous to say, well, we awarded based on, but now you've doubled it. You already awarded it. And if there was, I've already been open to renegotiating, but our contract was specifically done for a certain type of work that has increased cost. In addition to the fact that the cost of living and the cost to get staff to do the work is increased. I'm happy to sit and talk about what it is, but I have been unable to renegotiate, even, for example, on language support in two counties that have some of the most diverse languages To expect it to be blanket, that we would support every language without the funding would not work. I would again go back to the proposals and the actual genesis of everyone following the direction, or the four of us who follow the direction that was posted. We've talked about the transparencies. We're trying to pull in old contract amounts, old procurement processes. We're focused on the here and now and the way it was allocated. It's being put on the existing folks to bear the burden of the fact that there was not a process that double checked or negotiated or was behind with ODDS or procurement or wherever the hiccups were. We did act in good faith. That's what we are asking, is to look at what ODDS stated to us that we did. If that has to be reallocated or there's other conversations, then we need to have that, because that has not been stated. It has not been worked on. And there was a reason all of us took into account the current circumstances, not the previous contracts, what was happening at the time and what would be needed to do the work.
Yeah, Christy, thank you for clarifying that. From our perspective and our understanding was that we were, for 1 year, we were awarding the full biennium amount to each network. If there was some misinformation that was delivered in the process, then that certainly kind of, adds a twist to the situation. And that's why I said we're going to need to take this back and see what our additional options are going to be. Julie?
Thanks, Anna. I first of all agree with everything that the networks have shared so far. When the Coast Network applied in the original RFP for 21-23, we had no idea it was coming. We had no information. We had no idea what was being allocated. I took a chance that there was some extra funds, knowing it was the end of the year, and asked for a little bit of startup money, which was fantastic. And I think that if anyone here has taken the time and interest to look at what we've done, I'm not even clear. I don't even know that. That's how the conversation's going. When we wrote our budget, I did not get to make the online Q&A. So I had to fully refer to what was on Oregon Buys. And it clearly states, not only in Oregon Buys, but the template, it's a 1-year budget. Tell us what you need for the rest of the year. And that's exactly what we did. So I am in total disbelief that we are having to fight this hard for a few bucks to get back out on the ground and help families. It feels like there is no support. Thanks for taking my comment.
Thank you, Julie, for sharing. Well, I think I understand the issue better now, especially with that piece of information that was shared. I think at this point, we're gonna need to take it back to our team and with CNP and DOJ and see what additional options we may have at this time. And then we'll reconvene this group to have additional conversation about what those options might be.
So Anna, I think, just to clarify, and you may have already said this, but I just want to clarify it mainly for my own brain as well, is that in 21-23, because everything got pushed time-wise, because we got the money, the decision to give us the money came later, then the RFP had to be developed and put out the door. It was give us 1 year of your budget, because by that time we only had a year to contract with you, right? And we did the whole biennial amount of funding within that 1 year. But in the flip side, in 23-25,
that was the intent. But
right.
It seems like there was confusion, and some understood it one way, some understood it a different way. People submitted their proposals in a completely different way. And
right.
So that created kind of the disparity within the process. And ultimately,
Yeah, I hear that. But what I want to be clear on is that in 23-25, it wasn't like they doubled the money from 21, 23. So we can't even take that 1 year budget and double it because there's not enough money to cover that.
And that's what we're gonna have to navigate very very carefully going forward, is that the amount of money is still the same.
Right.
The money is still the same, plus 4.2%, whatever that is. And so that's what we're gonna have to navigate.
Yep. Okay.
And
I just want to make sure I was understanding it properly.
I believe that Cheryl copied all of us on a proposal that takes the percentage and uses the money that's actually there and doesn't go over. So I don't know, Cheryl can talk to that more clearly.
So I did in fact just resend the email that has all of the data. And I asked if Anna or Kathy, if you could please, Kathy, I don't know that I send it to you, I'm sorry. So I guess Anna or Leslie, if you can send that to Leanne and Heather, I would appreciate that. But it has the chart. I'm hoping if someone could double check that it has the 3 attachments on it. The email I just sent and forwarded, does it show the 3 attachments? And then later on in the
if Leslie already has that information, then we can get it from her.
So this is the information that we're basing the highlighted information, and the attached Q&A is the information that we've followed to do the 1 year budgets. And if you look down further in the email, it has the funding allocation chart on exactly who received 2 years equivalent, who had 1 year budget plus, and then who had the 1 year equivalent, and then what it would cost. We're only talking about so we're talking about wanting to make sure that we receive the full 171,504 that has been allocated to the family networks. And then we would only need an additional $161,900 or $761 to make sure all of the family networks are fully funded. It's not a lot of money we're asking for. And it's not that we're asking for additional money. These are funds that we require to do the amazing work that we do every day, and that we've done with the trust and with the good faith that we would receive our full funding based on our awards.
Thanks, Cheryl. Like I said, we need to take this information back and research what our options are going to be right now. Hopefully we'll be able to reconvene this group, I'm hoping next week, to come to some kind of resolution.
That answered my question on is timeline. I would like to ask for an assurance.
We have several networks without contracts right now and work. So
I just wanted to ask for your, I'm sorry, Anna. I just wanted to ask for your reassurance that we won't encounter, because there's a 45-day expiration to negotiations apparently.
Cheryl, breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
No, not very well.
Shoot.
You may want to turn off your video. Maybe that will
Hear
help.
me okay now?
You still choppy.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just put it, okay, if I can't get it and you can't hear me, then I'll just put it in the chat. But there's a 45-day apparently expiration on extension negotiations. And I would like your assurance that we will not encounter the situation where the state or OCDD is going to withdraw our extension contract offers if this goes beyond that 45-day mark.
I don't know, but Leanne, do you have it?
That would be the office of that would be the procurement office regulations. That has nothing to do with OCDD or even ODDS.
Yeah.
so we don't have assurances that, so in other words, what I'm trying to say then is that we are on a tight time frame and
Yeah.
not due to our, we don't have control over that. We're trying to get this negotiated fairly. And right, so we're on a really tight time frame.
We understand that. All right, well, sounds good. Thank you so much, guys. We will take this back. We will try to reschedule for next week. Hopefully we'll have some possible solutions to how move this forward.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.